This episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast is brought to you by Nomadicare. Now, personally, I love Nomadicare. I've used Nomadicare, and I recommend the company to all new travelers. What Nomadicare does is it takes the fear out of getting set up with a bad recruiter, which is the biggest fear that you have jumping into this journey. So they sit down, they interview recruiters, they vet them, get them on a list, and then provide them to you as a free service, as a free recruiter matchmaking service in order to get you started on your journey. Now, usually you only get 2 recruiters going through Nomadicare, but being a listener of the show, you can get 3. So this is how it's going to work. You go to nomadicare.com/Dylan. You will get set up with 3 recruiters to be on your dream team, as well as a guide to get you started on your journey.
The second sponsor of the show is TravCon, the Travelers Conference. I'm super excited to announce them as a sponsor of the show. TravCon was there for me before I got started as a medical nomad, and now I'm actually involved with the planning of the event. So super aligned, super congruent. I've been promoting them before they were even a sponsor, and so I'm excited to have them on. So there are 3 main reasons that you should go to TravCon this year. Number 1, value. This is the cheapest conference to go to as a medical professional. And also the only place that I've ever felt like royalty when you're walking in and all these staffing agencies and all these recruiters want to talk to you and you're bumping elbows with these travelers and they're interested about your story, about where you're coming from and what you're doing. And it's overall just a really good feel-good event. Number 2 is education and growth. So this conference was founded on the realization that there's a lot to know to be a medical traveler, to be a medical nomad. And so this is where you go to get the most updated tax information. This is where you go for those really niche specific questions on what's it like to travel in an RV and what's it like to travel to Hawaii. And then 3rd, community. This is where a lot of my traveler friends that are very near and dear to my heart right now, this is where we met. So this is where the relationship sparked. It's also one of the only places that you get to go to and see the leaders and meet the leaders of the industry, both on the staffing agency side and on the traveler side, and also get to meet your recruiters face-to-face that you've been working with. So TravCon is always in September every year. TravCon is also always in Las Vegas. The link is going to be in the show notes for you to get your ticket. I'll be at TravCon. All my friends will be at TravCon. I hope to see you there. Hey Nomads, Dylan coming at you from San Diego. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dylan Callier, and today we are talking about kind of my last episode on my Thailand experience, and my Indonesia experience, and talking about some of the problems that I saw going on in the country per se, and the reactions to that, and kind of how it relates to travel, of course, to being a medical nomad. But so for the most part, Indonesia and Thailand, and the culture is very supportive of being someone that helps another human being. And so you'll be walking down the street, or you're at a restaurant. They're very nice, they're very kind, like uncommonly what you would see here in the States, and they go out of their way to help you, especially staying in hostels. If you're in a tough situation, you can lean on them, and they take care of you, and it's really cool. It's a really cool experience. Except there is one caveat, there is one exception, and that is with taxis and tuk-tuks. So in Thailand, kind of they have these things called tuk-tuks, where it can be a small, like kind of a small car almost, but it can also be like a motorcycle with kind of a cart on the back. But if you think of a truck, best way to explain it, small truck, the back of it has the normal bed. It's not quite as big, but there's like a covering on top. And so you can climb in there. 3 other persons that you don't really know can climb in there as well. And so that's like one of their styles of taxis. So taxis are kind of like up here, kind of top if you want to drive by yourself. There's also Grab. Grab, which is something that you can take and order on your phone. It's basically by Uber, actually owned by Uber. And you can use Grab to have a car pick you up and take you where you need to go. Or you can go to this tuk-tuk, and you usually have to go there and they'll tell you this price, and it's like way overpriced, and then you have to negotiate and you have to haggle, and go back and forth. And it's like either you're going to spend 10 minutes and not be able to get an actual good price, or an actual fair price, or you'll get to the end after 10 minutes and it'll be a fair deal. And so that negotiation, that haggling, you kind of get it on the streets as well. But that's kind of more of a game. But for tuk-tuks, they can do some kind of like shady stuff. And so you might say yes to a certain price, or really they don't discuss the price before you get in if they have the option. Then at the end, they'll request for even more money. I have decided and negotiated with a tuk-tuk driver before. We agreed on the price. We get to the place that I'm needing to go to, and he says, oh, actually, the price I told you was to the city limits, not to drop you off at your hostel. So actually, you owe me more money. And at that point, you just say, no, that's not what we agreed upon. Sorry. And you move on. But so if you're kind of in those situations, like it kind of like bugs you, right? You're emotional and you're like, this guy's or this gal is trying to take advantage of me. And it's not necessarily a really good feeling. If you have, the common ground to say no, and going into it, what's a good deal, what's a bad deal, that helps a lot. But when I first got to Thailand, I see all these signs up and say, you have to take a taxi to leave the airport. That's the only ones allowed to pick you up. And so I was like, okay, cool. So taxi, like it's going to be a little more expensive probably, but I was reading is like, make sure that there's a meter in the taxi. So I was looking in the taxi, and this taxi had a meter, but this car that I was climbing into, I lifted the trunk to put in my stuff, and I saw this kind of like speaker system, and it was like neon green lights, and the car was like bright purple, and I climb in, and his seat's like decked out in this like racer type of thing where he's got two straps to strap himself into the car. He kind of has a steering wheel that looks like he has like a NOS button if he wanted to. And this like setup for his phone everything's like really, really nice. But also kind of like drag street racer type of nice. And so I had this intuition of like, what am I about to experience here? But there was a meter on the taxi. So I was like, okay, I'm cool. We start going, and at first the meter was going at a certain rate, and I was like, okay, I was looking at it. It's fine. And then all of a sudden, like halfway through the trip, it just started doubling. And I was trying to figure out what was going on. I was like, maybe we're going faster now. And I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. And so I get to where I needed to go. I paid. It was probably around 15 bucks, kind of like what I might have paid at at home for a taxi ride. Maybe this one was even cheaper than I would have paid at home. So it wasn't a bad deal. But then I started talking to the other travelers in the hostel, and I realized that I paid over twice as much as they did to get here from the airport. And I was like, I got taken advantage of. And that feeling sucks. And, you're like, oh my gosh. And then now not only are you ruined on that experience, now like I avoided taxis all the time after that, because I was scared that they were going to have this false meter that was going to rack up based on whatever he plugged into his phone or whatever. It was definitely connected somehow. And so that like not only ruined that experience for me, but ruined a lot of other experiences after that. And so now all of a sudden I'm guarded, I'm defensive. I'm like, I don't want to be taken advantage of by these tuk-tuk drivers. And it wasn't a bad deal. And I like the quote, you don't get upset over a bad deal. I've made bad deals before. I bought, I'm thinking of being in middle school or high school and buying this magic kit, and you get on the inside and it's actually like, it was an awful deal, but I made that choice. I knew what I was getting, and that was a bad deal, and I was still okay with it. The reason people get emotional is over unfair deals. And so even though this wasn't a bad deal, I found out the other travelers all paid half as much as I did. And so in the grand scheme of things, it's like $7 less, not that big. But still, you have that, you're like, I got taken advantage of, like, this is unfair. And so that is when emotions get really high. And that is when, unfortunately, a lot of travelers will either break off their relationships with the recruiters or kind of certain other emotional decisions that I'll get to here in a second with the story. And so a really interesting study was performed with monkeys, where this also just kind of popped into my head. So you can YouTube unfair monkey. I think it'll probably pop up. But it was a study done where they had two monkeys in separate cages. Cages were big, wasn't like a real cage, but kind of where they were kept. And so the scientists would walk up and the monkeys would run to the side because they knew they were about to get food. And so the scientists would give one monkey something really like one of their delicacies. So I think it was like grapes and something really sweet, where the monkey really, really enjoyed those grapes. Maybe it was banana. I think that's too stereotypical. So I think it was grapes. And then for the second monkey in the second cage, the scientists gave that monkey seeds, which were still edible, and they're okay with seeds, but not as much as grapes. And so this happened once, and you see the second monkey like look over and look back and look over and look back. And I believe there was a task that they had to perform in order to get this reward. So I think the monkey had to do something, and then they got this reward. So the monkey eats the seed. Scientist comes back. They perform the task. Same first monkey gets the grape. First monkey's very happy. Second monkey gets the seed or the nuts or whatever. And the second monkey throws the seed at the scientist. He's angry. And this is, the monkey is realizing this unfairness, that the exact same thing is happening between him and this other monkey. And this other monkey's getting grapes and he's getting seeds, and this is unfair. Third time it happens, same thing. Give the first monkey grape. He's very happy. Give the second monkey seeds. Monkey starts flipping out. Monkey starts screaming and shaking the cage and getting so angry after realizing how unfair this is, and how he's getting seeds and he's not getting grapes like this other monkey. So not a bad deal for that monkey. That monkey's still getting food. Monkey's still getting seeds, but it's unfair because this other monkey's getting these awesome grapes, and I'm over here stuck with seeds and nuts and got duped by a taxi driver in Bangkok. So that's a story. So it's the problem is, as a traveler going into Thailand and Indonesia, you have these tuk-tuk drivers, and you're having to. It takes a lot of energy to negotiate with these individuals, and they're trying to way obnoxious pricing, way more expensive than you should be paying, and it's unfair. And even though it's not a bad deal, you're like trying to get the fair deal because all of a sudden now it matters, especially if you're there for a month. You know how it works, and so it's uncomfortable. You don't necessarily like it. Some people really turn it into a game and do enjoy it, but most individuals do not like having to just kind of haggle. They just want to walk up and just like take a tuk-tuk to where they want to go and just like not have to worry about the pricing. Like, just tell me what it is at a fair rate, and don't take advantage of me. But that's all they want to do. They just want to show up, go to where they want to go, and having these adventures. So that was the problem. Problem was, travelers are tired of trying to negotiate with these tuk-tuk drivers, and they don't want to feel like they're being taken advantage of. Solution: with technology, Grab was introduced so that the travelers could order it on their phone. The Grab driver would come pick them up. It's Uber, basically. Grab existed before Uber. Uber created itself what it is now, and then eventually actually bought Grab. So Grab is owned by Uber, and it's a flat rate. So they have their flat rates. It's much cheaper. It's maybe a little bit more expensive than the best deal you could get with a tuk-tuk driver, but you're not getting an unfair deal. And so it's a fair deal every time. You see the price up front. They're not allowed to ask you for more money at the end. And then also what's nice about Grab is that there's a button where if you're feeling unsafe, you can hit this button and it'll automatically alert the police around your area to come and kind of intervene. So there's some really cool solutions that were going on with that. The feeling unsafe that they solved. and then also the feelings of being taken advantage of and having unfair deals. So this, to my knowledge, is legal throughout both Thailand and Indonesia, because otherwise the app wouldn't be able to work. What you see happening is the community coming forward and putting up nasty signs saying, like, you can't use these apps here. Please support our local our local tuk-tuk drivers. And they're highly against it. And so there's one story that I ran into with a traveler. She was trying to get into a Grab. The Grab driver was trying to help her luggage into the car. There were other tuk-tuk drivers or even motorcycle drivers that came forward and were like being really aggressive and trying to take her luggage outside of the car, saying you're not supposed to be here, all this stuff. So even though it's legal, like the community is coming forward and saying it's illegal. So I'm not quite sure what's going on in that situation, but the community is having a very hard pushback against this company Grab. And so instead of actually solving the problem by with all these tuk-tuk drivers saying, you know what, we're just going to start giving flat rates, it'll actually be a little bit better than what Grab has to offer. All the tuk-tuk drivers are still operating the same way and still operating in a way that puts somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, or puts somebody that doesn't know the information of what's fair, of what to ask, at risk of being taken advantage of paying twice as much for a ride versus somebody that does know. And so they can do that because before Grab, they held all the cards. So I think of kind of like persons with all the information going into a deal and making a deal with somebody that doesn't have any of the information and coming out with the financial incentive of wanting to pay that person less so that they can make more. That is kind of like holding all the cards. So when you approached a tuk-tuk driver, they knew how much it was going to cost for them to take you there. And they also know what a fair deal is, but when they offer it to you, it is at an incredibly inflated price, and they're hoping that you just say yes. This also goes for a lot of the tourism trips for those deals, and then also kind of like the street haggling that goes on. And so they're holding all the cards, and you're coming forward, and if you don't know kind of what's fair, and you don't have that information, you're basically at the mercy of that individual. So you might be thinking you're getting a fair deal, and then it's, at the end you're paying double the price. Now they're incentivized to do so because if they get one person that pays that amount, that's a really good haul for them, and they can take care of their families with it. And so it's not like this malicious intent, but it's also like you don't like that feeling of being taken advantage of. And so they hold all the cards in that situation. And so this is where I noticed this problem and start relating it to the travel industry. So in St. Louis, when I was working as a physical therapist, and even before that, when I was working as a physical therapy aide or technician, there was these kind of big exercise mill type outpatient companies that were coming in, and they came in, they kind of like bought some of the other clinics, and they were paying physical therapists a certain amount. And eventually it came forward that the contracts that they had with medical insurances, they were actually making much more than what they were claiming to, and could afford to pay everybody more, not just physical therapists, but the physical therapy assistants, also the front office. And so they were just racking that up for profits. So that came forward, and then there was a mass exodus. And so everybody kind of left because it was an unfair deal. They turned out to be making much more per patient than they basically told all the physical therapists. If you're using like a normal like business model, like making 20%, they were definitely not making that. And so a lot of people were taken advantage of for a very long time. So that company had a mass exodus, and so they ended up having to use a lot of new graduates that were hungry for a job because it was an oversaturated market. And eventually they recovered and they kind of fixed it. But that doesn't mean they didn't lose a lot from all of those PTs leaving and all the other front office personnel and physical therapy aides and stuff like that. A lot of them left. And so in that case, that is something that I'd seen before I got to the travel industry. And so this mimics the kind of the problems that we have where a lot of the staffing agencies know what the bill rates are, bill rate being the amount of money that a hospital or clinic will pay per hour for a clinician in order to work there. Now, this used to be a much shadier industry than what it was when I was looking into this 4 years ago, where there wasn't all this information out there. And so now you know that, oh, I should be working with multiple companies. But before, some recruiters would say, oh no, like this is a one-on-one thing. If you work with somebody else, I'm done with you. Like you don't get my jobs, stuff like that. I've worked very hard, very kind of like shady car salesman-y type stuff that wasn't very good. And there were good recruiters out there. And so if you were lucky enough to find those recruiters, then they really shed the light of, no, you need to be working with more recruiters because I won't always have the job that you want. And so you need to diversify and cast a bigger net in order to catch that dream job. But if you were unfortunate enough to kind of land on one of these recruiters that kind of bullied you into these choices, it's no good. And staffing agencies, they kind of hold all the cards in this. So they were holding how much they're getting from these hospitals. Now I've softened my stance on bill rates and then coming forward with it. Ultimately, yes, it's more about what you're taking home as a traveler. And now that you know you can work with other companies, if a company comes forward and says, hey, we kind of offer it a little bit more, and you notice that discrepancy, you go with the one that's going to pay higher. Also, with the bill rates, hospitals do have contracts, especially if it's a direct contract or an exclusive contract, saying you will not tell anybody what we're paying you per hour. So staffing agencies do, for maybe if they have 20% of direct contracts or exclusive contracts, for sure cannot tell somebody how much they're making per that hospital, because hospital also is holding all the cards and wants to make sure that if they are paying a staffing agency over here a certain amount, that staffing agency doesn't tell this staffing agency over here because they're actually paying them less. So it's all this like game of deception and kind of being hoodwinked and everything else going on. So a lot of staffing agencies will use this contract they have with a few of their hospitals and saying, oh, we can't tell you about any of the bill rates, when that's actually false, when there's things called like BMSs and MSPs that are basically middlemen between the hospitals and the staffing agencies. A lot of companies are finding their jobs through MSPs and BMSs, and they absolutely can tell what they're making, or it's the same, or maybe they do have a non-disclosure contract, but it's all the same with all these industries or with all these staffing agencies. And so if you're lucky enough to get a recruiter that does tell you bill rates, that's amazing, because now you have more information. Now you're seeing like your value, and you're seeing, okay, so there's this much coming in per hour, and this company's taking good care of me. And the other side of the argument is like, well, they can always lie. It's like, yes, but I mean, that's an argument with everything. So I'm still for sharing the bill rates, but I also understand that there are contracts out there that don't allow them. So ultimately, having that information makes you more empowered and have more self-worth and self-value and understand the business better, which makes you a better traveler. So the bill rates are being kind of held by, one, hospitals, two, by staffing agencies. And this was a bigger deal than it is now. So now there's a lot more accountability going into staffing agencies, because we have the travel leaders on our side, the influencers, telling how to handle these and saying that it's okay to work with more than one company, and telling new travelers that, hey, if you're getting guilted into something by a recruiter, ditch that recruiter, don't work with that person, and what to expect for fair pay. And so now is not as big of a deal. So that's also a reason I'm softening my stance on bill rates. But before it was very similar to that PT clinic scenario where they were basically lying about what they were making. And if you don't know what that person is making, then you can't decide if it's a fair deal or not. And so now it's easier to compare pay packages with everyone, and you're working with multiple companies, so it's not as big of a deal. But before, when you thought you could only stay with one company, it was a big deal. And so a lot of people started feeling unfair when they started working at these clinics, and lo and behold, there's another traveler there. Oh, guess what happens? Water cooler talk. We're talking about pay now. And I realized that you realize that you're making much less than this other traveler. So this is the story of how this used to go down a lot. And this was actually something that happened to one of my best friends that has been a best friend of mine since the beginning of college. And so otherwise known as Bro Chick. Bro Chick, affectionately known as Bro Chick. She has been there for a lot of my lowest lows and has been just a stable friend. Kind of those situations where you're looking around and nobody's really there, and lo and behold, Bro Chick's still there. I still have a lot of friends that were still there, but Bro Chick is definitely one of those friends. So thank you so much. And this is what happened not too long ago. Bro Chick was in a situation where she needed to get a contract ASAP. And the kind of staffing agency that she was working for really just one at this point. She had some multiple, but it wasn't working out for where she needed to go. That staffing agency knew this. They knew that she was kind of in a bind and short on time. And so staffing agency came forward and said, hey, we have this job that you can work at. And this is the contract. And this is, when I looked at the contract, something was fishy. And it didn't fit for the setting, the location, and everything else that needed to go into it. I won't say kind of what exactly was going into it. I'm going to be pretty vague on that. But looking at it, she was making a certain amount, and it didn't quite feel right. And so I came forward and I was like, Bro Chick, like this is what I want you to do. So I kind of went into all my negotiation steps, and I said, this is how I'd handle it. Take these steps, do it. And so she did it. Lo and behold, she was able to get $200 more per week for that contract. So that means that staffing agency was withholding $200 per week that they could have offered her up front. Now, the original contract wasn't a bad contract, but when all of a sudden you realize this staffing agency is withholding money, you're like, wait, that would have been a really unfair deal. Are you still holding back on this? And so it gives you that bad feeling. So that bad feeling, similar to that taxi experience, ruins the rest of your experiences with other staffing agencies, because now you don't have this, you have this distrust. And so ultimately, Bro Chick felt very upset with this, and against some recommendations, ended up leaving the contract early because of it. Again, people don't get upset over bad deals. People get upset over unfair deals. And never worked with that agency again because of the fact of the unfair deal, and feeling like this person, this recruiter that is supposed to be taking care of me, that says we're friends and does all this stuff, actually comes forward and tries to take advantage of me. And so that is that situation. That is kind of the same problem that I saw over in Thailand, in the PT industry when I was working in St. Louis, and now in the travel industry, that you have persons holding all the cards. And then all of a sudden a solution pops up where now we're having staffing agencies that are starting to automate exactly what the amount is for their profit margins. So there's not this like massive range of percentages based on gross profits. Instead, it's a very defined, either a certain percentage or a certain range, very defined, so that every deal going through is fair. And so now, because there are staffing agencies starting to do that, there's other pushbacks coming from the other staffing agencies, similar to the pushback of the community for the tuk-tuk drivers and the taxi drivers. So that is what has sparked me to kick off this negotiation series that I'm going to be launching after this episode. You're wondering, like, how much can you go into negotiations? Well, I wrote down all the individual points that I want to talk about. They're probably going to be shorter episodes, but there's 15. there's 15 that I want to talk about. We'll see if it's more or less once I get into it. But this used to be a very kind of shady industry, where going into it, if you didn't know the right questions to ask, if you didn't know how to negotiate, if you didn't know what was unfair, then you got the experience of finding out through another traveler, through hearing it online, through hearing it through a podcast, through reading it through a blog, and then you realize that the past X amount of contracts you've taken was actually unfair. And that sucks. And so as an industry, we're trying to solve this issue. As travelers, as empowered leaders, as influencers, we're trying to solve this issue to where you don't need to know all the nooks and crannies and nitty gritty in order to get a fair deal, in order to have a model that's win-win in both sides, where the staffing agency is still making very good profits and still being a very good business because they have to support all those other travelers to take care of us and keep themselves safe in instances where they have to reimburse travelers for something that happened, or creating those happiness moments, things like that, to where they can still be a business and operate and keep the doors open and be sustainable and still grow, but also not have Bro Chick over here lose out on $200 a week. Because if that's a normal contract, $200 a week, that's $2,600 that could have went towards her schooling, her debt, her investments, other big life things. Maybe you want to go back and see the nephews like me. $2,600 can go a long way. And so keeping people from feeling that unfairness and ultimately helping the trust of this industry come back, because once you have an experience like that, it travels forward and it ruins a whole bunch of other experiences. And it's also one of the first things you hear when you're getting into this industry. And trying to be careful, not knock over my makeshift desk here, since I'm able to stand and talk and tell you guys about this, but not allowing that to be the first thing that you hear when you're jumping into the travel industry. One, you have the adventure, and then you talk to another traveler, and then you find out like it's really shady, and or it used to be really shady, and you have to be careful, and you have to know all this stuff, and you're like, wow, I wonder if I'm gonna be taken advantage of. And so it ultimately really negatively impacts this industry. And so if we solve this problem to where newer travelers don't have to know all this information to get a fair deal, to get a win-win model, then we win. And so that is the ultimate goal of this show, is to change the industry for the better, to get everyone out of that feeling of, I wonder if I'm being taken advantage of right now, and those yucky feelings that happen when you're taking taxi drivers and tuk-tuk drivers, and that happened during my experience at the PT clinics. And so, about to kick off the negotiation series. They're going to be dropping once a week. Stay tuned. If you like these episodes, if you're excited for the negotiations, those will be coming at you on Spotify and iTunes, or any of your favorite podcast apps. If you want the early access to those episodes, you can go to YouTube and please subscribe there. Speaking of subscribing, reviews definitely help the show. Likes, comments, anything like that, any type of engagement helps more individuals see this. And so those newer travelers that are worried about taking advantage of getting into negotiations, more people that see it, more people we can help, which is the ultimate goal of this podcast. So thank you so much for your support. It means the world to me, and I'm excited to kick off this negotiation stuff. It's been coming for a long time. I see a lot of half-truths out there, so I'm very excited to get started. And all you nomads, have safe travels.